Welcome to another video in Python2.x. In this video, we will talk about some of the basic differences while coding in Python 2 and Python 3. We will tell you about the very common things you will use every day while coding in Python 3 for some of the new users who are using Python 3. It's okay for them, but for the regular users who are accustomed in coding in Python 2 and now are switching to Python 3, please take a note of these differences and you will need this every day. I will show you the differences in a command window separated in a split screen. The first differences is the division. Any imperfect division that you do in Python 2 will always result in an integer number, in an integer answer, unless you explicitly define it as a float. While in case of Python 3, any division will always result in a floating point number. Here are some of the examples. I will show you some more examples while coding. Take a note, in the left hand side of the screen, it's the Python 2 command window, and in the right hand side of the screen is the Python 3 command window. I am dividing 5 by 2 and the answer is 2 in case of Python 2. And in order to get an exact 2.5, that is a floating type answer, you need to divide 5.0 divided by 2.0. While in case of Python 3, if you divide 5 by 2, the automatic or the default answer will be in a form of floating point number, that is 2.5. The next is a print command. In case of Python 3, use of bracket or parenthesis is very much essential while printing any stuff. If you don't use a bracket or a parenthesis, a missing parenthesis error will arise in Python 3, but in Python 2, this use of bracket or parenthesis is not at all essential. You have seen that I have made this mistake while showing you the last differences. While printing in Python 3, you have to use a bracket while you print. Without the use of a bracket or a parenthesis, will give you a missing parenthesis error in Python 3. The next one is an input function. In case of Python 2, there are two types of input function. One is the input and another is the raw input. The input function accepts your input in a format as it is. That is, if you give a number, it will accept it as an integer or a float. If you give a string, it will accept it as a string. But in case of Python 3, input function always accepts your input as a type string. While in case of Python 2, again, there is a separate function called the raw input, where the input is automatically taken in the form of a string. Here are the example. If I use the input function in Python 2 and enter a number 6, the type will be an integer type. Sorry, I made a mistake there while writing the variable. Yeah, you can see it's a type integer. If you enter a string, you need to keep in mind, in case of Python 2, while using input, you need to enter the string in between double quotes to let know that it is a string to Python. So if you check the type, it is a str or a string type. But in case of Python 3, input function, whatever you give input, it will be taken as in a form of a string by default. I have actually entered a number 456, but if you see the type, it is a class str or a string type. I will show you another example using string. In this case, you don't need to use double quotes since its default acceptance is a form of a string. While in case of Python2, there is another command called raw input, where your input will be automatically taken as a string by default, irrespective of what you enter. Maybe it's a number or a str, it will always type str. In case of Python2, let's see. See, there is no predefined command called raw input defined in Python2. The next differences is in case of a file handling. In case of Python2, closing a file is not at all mandatory after you do your functions in the file. But in case of Python2, closing the file is a mandatory after you perform your functions. If you don't close the file in case of Python2, any output, if you have printed any while doing your functions or while performing your task, you will not see any output in the output file. I have written a short code. I have just printed the numbers 1 to 10 in a loop within a file. We save it. Yeah, it's saved. Now I am running it in Python2 idle at first. Let's see. Press Alt F5 in order to run the program. You can see that the numbers are printed in the output file. Now let me show you if this program run in Python2 idle. Just changing the output file name. First of all, you can see the size of the file is 0 KB. So yes, there is no output written in the py3.txt output file. I am just adding one extra line, that is I am closing the O1 or the closing the file at the end of the program, and now running again in Python2. Now you can see the output is written in the file. The next differences is in between the ASCII and the UNICODE encoding between Python2 and Python2. In case of Python2, the default encoding is ASCII, while in Python2 it's UTF-8. That is, it can automatically recognize any special characters from their respective Unicode ID. While in case of Python2, you need to use a preceded U. Your Unicode ID should be preceded by a U in order to make Python2 identify that it's a Unicode ID. This feature of Python 3 comes very handy while reading any special characters from a file where the Unicode ID is not present within that file. So let me show you some examples. First, let me show you what an Unicode ID is. In the left hand side is the special characters, in the right hand side is their respective Unicode ID. You can see for alpha is 0, 3B1. Again, here in the left hand side of the screen is the Python2 idle, and in the right hand side of the screen is the Python 3 idle. I am just entering the Unicode ID of alpha in Python 2, and it is telling a type string. So in order to make it identify that it's a Unicode ID, you need to add U before the string. Now if you see the type, it's a Unicode and it is printing alpha. Here to show you another example, I am trying to print alpha, beta, gamma and delta all together. While in case of Python 3, you don't need to use your string does not need a preceded U while printing a Unicode ID. See guys, I have made another a very common mistake while printing, which I have told you earlier. So you can see that you don't need to tell Python 3 that it's a Unicode ID by writing U before the string. It will automatically identify it as a Unicode ID and it will print you the special character. Now in case of Python 2, if you directly initialize using the special character, it will give you an unsupported characters as input. But in case of Python 3, if you initialize a variable using the special character, it will identify it. So this feature comes in handy while reading a file. So if you like our video, please like, share, and in order to get regular updates from BioPandit, please press the bell icon. Subscribe to our channel for further updates. Thank you.